A promise made beside a hospital bed is about to change your love story. And your name was spoken first. My beloved child. Somewhere behind a closed hospital door, a promise was made that is about to reach directly into your love story, and before that promise was finished, your name was spoken first. Not casually. Not by accident. Your name entered that quiet room at the exact moment someone realized there was no longer any reason to hide what the heart had been trying to say. The person you love was standing beside that hospital bed carrying emotions they had kept buried for far too long. They had walked into the room expecting an ordinary conversation, perhaps even a difficult one. But then a trembling voice asked them one question that changed everything. If you already know who your heart belongs to, why are you still waiting? They froze. Because there was only one person they could think about. You. And what happened seconds later turned that question into a promise. Don't skip, because the promise itself was only the beginning. There was something unusual about the way your name was spoken. It wasn't followed by hesitation or uncertainty. It was followed by silence, the kind of silence that happens when everyone in a room suddenly understands something important without needing an explanation. The person in that hospital bed had apparently noticed more than anyone realized. They had seen the way your person changed whenever you were mentioned. They had noticed the guarded smile, the sudden softness in their voice, the way they defended you when someone questioned whether this relationship could really last. And now, with life feeling more fragile than usual, pretending no longer seemed worth it. Promise me you won't lose them because you were afraid, came the request. Your person looked down, fighting emotions they could barely contain. But before giving an answer, they revealed something nobody in that room expected. They had already been thinking about taking a serious step toward you. They just hadn't known whether the timing was right. Then came the promise. Quiet. Simple. Powerful enough to change what happens next between you. Your person reached toward the hospital bed and said they would stop allowing fear, distance, old opinions, or unfinished circumstances to decide the future of this relationship. They promised that when the right moment came, they would speak honestly to you about what they truly wanted. But there was another detail, one that makes this far bigger than an emotional bedside conversation. Someone else in that room heard the promise. Someone whose approval, resistance, or influence may have been one of the hidden reasons your love story has moved so slowly. And instead of objecting, that person said something completely unexpected. Something huge is waiting for you. Because after hearing your name and the promise connected to it, they quietly reached into a nearby drawer, pulled out something that had been kept there for years, and placed it directly into your person's hand. For a moment, your person simply stared at what had been placed in their hand, because they understood immediately that this was not an ordinary object. It carried history. It carried a meaning nobody had spoken aloud yet. And the person who handed it over looked directly at them and said, "I was saving this for the day you finally became certain." Those words changed the atmosphere in the room. Your person's fingers closed carefully around it as their eyes returned to the hospital bed, searching for an explanation. That was when another truth surfaced. Long before this night, conversations about you had already happened inside this family. Your name had been mentioned when you weren't there. Questions had been asked about your character, your intentions, and the effect you seem to have on the person you love. Your person had assumed those conversations were signs of resistance. But they were about to discover that at least one important heart had quietly changed its mind. The person beside the bed admitted something your love never expected to hear. I watched who you became when that person entered your life. Suddenly, this wasn't about whether you fit someone else's expectations. It was about the difference they had seen in your person. They had noticed how your presence seemed to make them more thoughtful, more grounded, and more serious about the future. Even during periods when communication between you became uncertain, your name never truly disappeared. And then came the detail that made your person's eyes fill with tears. Apparently, during one of the hardest moments surrounding this hospital stay, the person lying there had asked for you by name before asking about almost anything else. Not because they expected you to appear at the hospital. They wanted to know one thing: are those two still holding on to each other? Stay till the end, because the answer your person gave exposed just how deeply they have been carrying you. They didn't pretend everything between you had been perfect. They admitted there had been fear. Delays. Moments when they almost convinced themselves it would be easier to walk away than fight for something this meaningful. But then they said, I tried to imagine my future without them, and that scared me more than anything standing in our way. The room went completely still. That was the moment the person who once seemed capable of standing between you finally understood what this relationship meant. They looked toward the object still resting in your person's palm and said, then don't wait until another hospital room teaches you how quickly time can change. Your person lowered their eyes again, and only then did the true significance of that object begin to become clear. It had once been given before another life-changing promise in this family, a promise connected to commitment, loyalty, and choosing one person without running when life became difficult. But just as your person began to understand why it had been handed to them, someone near the doorway spoke up and revealed that a decision concerning you had already been made before your person ever entered that room. The voice from the doorway belonged to someone your person never expected to be on your side. For months, this had been the one person whose silence felt like rejection, whose guarded expression made your person believe that bringing you fully into the family would create an impossible conflict. But now they stepped closer and said, you should know what we decided before you make another assumption about us. Your person looked stunned. The object in their palms suddenly felt heavier. Then came the first surprise. While your person had been worrying about whether the family would ever accept what the two of you shared, several private conversations had already taken place. Your name had been discussed carefully, not with the hostility your person feared, but with a question nobody had dared ask them directly. Could you actually be the person they had been waiting to see beside them all along? And the answer had changed after something happened recently. Something your person didn't even know the family had witnessed. It was a small moment involving you, almost too ordinary to remember. A message you sent when your person was struggling. A choice you made to show patience instead of demanding answers. A moment when you could have walked away, yet somehow you left the door open without abandoning your own dignity. Your person may have believed nobody else noticed, but someone did. They saw how deeply that gesture affected them. They watched your person reread your words, sit quietly for several minutes, and finally admit, they understand me in a way I don't know how to explain. That sentence traveled farther through the family than your person realized. It softened someone who had been skeptical. It challenged someone who believed this relationship was temporary. And beside that hospital bed, those hidden conversations finally came into the light. "We weren't trying to keep you from them," the person near the doorway confessed. "We were waiting to see whether you were serious enough to stop running from what you already knew." Your person couldn't answer immediately, because that truth touched the exact place they had been hiding from. The biggest obstacle had never been the family. Not entirely. Part of it had been their own fear of making a promise they could never take back. But now they were standing in a hospital room holding an object tied to commitment, hearing your name spoken with unexpected acceptance, and remembering the promise they had made only minutes earlier. Something inside them shifted. They slipped the object carefully into their pocket and asked one quiet question: "If I do this, will you stand behind me?" The answer came almost immediately. "If you're choosing with your whole heart, yes." Your person turned toward the hospital bed, overwhelmed, and whispered that they finally knew what they needed to do. But don't skip what comes next, because before they could leave the room, the person in that bed called them back and revealed one final detail about you, something they had discovered without either of you knowing, and something that could completely change how soon this promise reaches your door. The timing felt almost impossible. Your person stood beneath the quiet hospital lights staring at your name on the screen, while the promise they had just made was still fresh in their heart. For several seconds, they didn't move. They didn't even open what had appeared. After everything that had happened inside that room, seeing your name at that exact moment felt like the one thing they were emotionally unprepared for. Their first instinct was to wonder whether you had somehow sensed something changing. But when they finally looked closer, they realized this wasn't the kind of message they had expected. There was no accusation. No demand for answers. Instead, your words carried a calmness that frightened them even more, because they sounded like someone who had finally stopped chasing certainty. And buried inside those few lines was a sentence your person read twice. Then a third time. It quietly told them that you cared deeply. But you could no longer keep building a future around questions they refused to answer. That sentence changed everything. Your person leaned against the hallway wall and closed their eyes, suddenly understanding what the hospital conversation had been preparing them to face. You weren't threatening to disappear. You weren't trying to force their hand. You were simply protecting your heart after giving this connection more patience than they realized. And that made the promise beside the hospital bed feel urgent in an entirely different way. They reached into their pocket and touched the object they had been given, remembering the words, "A promise means nothing if you keep it hidden." For the first time, your person saw the situation clearly. They had spent so much time worrying about whether choosing you would change their life that they had ignored the possibility of losing you by refusing to choose at all. Their thumb hovered above your name. They started typing. Stopped. Deleted everything. Started again. Because suddenly, "I miss you" wasn't enough. "Can we talk" wasn't enough either. What they needed to tell you was much bigger. Then the hospital room door opened behind them. The family member who had once seemed most uncertain about you stepped into the hallway and immediately understood what was happening. Your person showed them the screen without saying a word. They read your message, looked back at your person, and said something unexpectedly gentle: "Then answer before silence answers for you." That was all it took. Your person stopped trying to create the perfect sentence and began writing from the place they had been hiding all along. They told you there was something important they needed to say face to face. They admitted that tonight had changed something. And before sending it, they added one final line that made their hands tremble. This time, I'm not coming to you with another question. I'm coming with a decision. Their finger hovered over send, but before they touched the screen, another notification appeared beneath your name, and those few unexpected words revealed that you might already be closer to this hospital than anyone had realized. The new notification made your person's heart race, because it changed the meaning of everything they had been preparing to say. You weren't at the hospital, but you were close enough that seeing you tonight was suddenly possible. Your message mentioned that you were nearby handling something unrelated and would be heading home soon. No dramatic invitation. No hint that you knew what had just happened upstairs. Just an ordinary detail arriving at an extraordinary moment. Your person stared through the hospital windows at the lights beyond the parking lot and realized they had a choice. Send another carefully written message and retreat behind a screen, or keep the promise while the courage to keep it was still alive. They deleted the long paragraph they had been composing. Then they sent only one sentence: "Before you go home, can you give me 10 minutes?" The message showed as delivered. Seconds passed. Then a minute. And suddenly, those 10 minutes felt more frightening than every difficult conversation that had come before. When your reply finally appeared, it was simple: "Okay." Where? Your person almost laughed from sheer disbelief. After months of hesitation, distance, and questions, the door they feared had closed was still open, but only enough for honesty to enter. They gave you a quiet meeting place near the hospital entrance and immediately went back into the room. Everyone looked toward them. Your person didn't explain much. They simply said, "They're coming." The person in the bed smiled as though they had been waiting to hear those exact words. Then they pointed toward the object your person had been given earlier and offered one unexpected piece of advice: "Don't show them that first." Your person looked confused. The answer came gently. "If they're going to believe you, let them hear your heart before they see what you're carrying." That mattered, because the object was never supposed to persuade you. It was meant to confirm a decision your person had already made. And tonight, you were about to find out whether that decision had come too late. A few minutes later, your person stepped outside into the cool night air. Every sound seemed sharper: the distant traffic, the opening hospital doors, the footsteps crossing the pavement. They kept rehearsing what they would say, but every version sounded too polished for something this real. Then they saw you approaching. And everything they had practiced disappeared. You looked composed, but there was caution in your eyes. You had come because some part of you still cared, yet you were no longer willing to mistake hope for certainty. Your person walked toward you slowly and said your name exactly the way it had been spoken beside that hospital bed, carefully, as though it carried the future. Then came the words you had waited far too long to hear: "I owe you the truth about why I kept holding back." But before explaining, your person reached into their pocket, touched the object hidden there, and added, "And after I tell you what happened upstairs tonight, there's something I need to ask you, because my family already knows what I'm about to do." For the first time, you didn't rush to make the moment easier for them. You simply stood there and waited, because after everything your heart had carried, you needed truth more than another beautiful sentence. Your person noticed that difference immediately. They took a slow breath and admitted that their distance had never meant a lack of love. It had come from fear of disappointing people they cared about, fear of making a permanent choice, and fear that once they openly chose you, there would be no safe place left to hide if things went wrong. Then they told you about the hospital room. About hearing your name spoken before they could even explain what was happening between you. About the question that exposed everything: if you know who your heart belongs to, why are you still waiting? Your expression changed, but your person wasn't finished. They looked directly at you and said, "Tonight I realized I wasn't protecting our future. I was risking it." Then came the part you never expected. Your person told you that the family resistance you had both feared was no longer what it once seemed. Conversations had happened without you. Opinions had softened. Someone who had quietly questioned whether you belonged in this future had finally admitted that the way your person loved you was impossible to ignore. But your person refused to use family approval as the reason you should trust them now. "I need you to understand something," they said. "Even if nobody had changed their mind tonight, I still would have had to make this decision." That sentence mattered. Because for once, they weren't choosing you because circumstances had become convenient. They were choosing to stop allowing circumstances to control what they already knew. Don't skip what happened next. Your person finally pulled their hand from their pocket, but instead of immediately showing you the object they had been carrying, they kept their fist closed and told you about the promise made beside that hospital bed. They repeated it carefully. No more disappearing behind uncertainty. No more allowing fear to speak louder than love. No more expecting you to wait while they avoided giving your relationship a name, a direction, and a real place in their future. Your eyes filled with emotion, but you asked the question they secretly feared most: why should I believe this time will be different? Your person went silent. Not because they lacked an answer, but because they knew promises alone were exactly what had brought you here. So instead of defending themselves, they opened their hand. Resting in their palm was the object passed down through their family, something once carried into another lifelong commitment years ago. Your person looked from it to you and whispered, "I'm not asking this object to prove anything. I'm asking my next actions to prove it." Then they revealed the decision their family already knew about, and it wasn't simply to make the relationship official. They had decided to change something concrete in their life so there would finally be room for the future they wanted with you. But before they could tell you exactly what that change was, the hospital doors opened behind them, and someone stepped outside carrying a message meant specifically for you. Neither of you expected anyone else to become part of that moment, but the person walking toward you wasn't there to interrupt it. They carried a small folded note and stopped a respectful distance away before holding it toward you. "This was meant for you," they said. Your person looked just as surprised as you were. The note had been written earlier from the hospital bed, before anyone knew you would be standing outside that night. Your name was written across the front. For a second, you hesitated, because suddenly the entire evening felt connected by details nobody could have planned. You opened it carefully. The message inside wasn't long, but one line made your eyes stop: "Please don't judge their future only by the fear that delayed them." The note didn't ask you to forgive everything. It didn't pressure you to say yes. Instead, it acknowledged something important: you had already been patient, and whatever happened next had to respect your heart too. Then the 5.